He was never supposed to lose. Not in business, not in love, and especially not in a game. But when Alexander Steele leaned back in his leather chair, a whiskey glass in one hand and a lazy smirk on his face, he didn't know that the dare his friend tossed across the private poker table would be the one thing that would strip him bare. "Bet you can undress her," Blake said, nodding toward the grainy security feed on his phone. It was late, the after-party had died down, and they were in the Billionaire's high-rise penthouse, surrounded by the spoils of wealth, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and enough champagne to drown regret. Who? Alexander barely looked up. Blake zoomed in on the image. A girl mopping the floor near the executive elevator. Her, that virgin janitor everyone whispers about, Eva something. Rumor is she hasn't even kissed a man. The guys chuckled, half drunk, careless. Alexander raised an eyebrow, finally glancing at the screen. The image was blurred, black and white, but even through the pixelation, something in her posture caught his attention. She wasn't bent with shame. She moved like she belonged there, even if her uniform said otherwise. "Undress her?" he repeated, swirling his drink. "What is this, high school?" "You've seduced actresses, heiresses, supermodels," Blake laughed. "We all know you win. But this one? She's different. No status, no ambition, just skin and silence. I bet you can't even get her to look at you twice." Alexander should have walked away, but ego was a stubborn animal, and curiosity, a more dangerous one. He stared at the frozen frame. She looked unimpressed by the world, unimpressed by men like him. That was new. "All right," he said slowly, downing the rest of his drink. "You're on. Let's see what a virgin janitor can do to a billionaire." He didn't know then that she'd end up undressing far more than his expectations. The next day, Alexander was back in the office early, not to sign off on billion-dollar tech deals, not to renegotiate mergers, but to see her. He watched from his glass corner suite as she stepped off the night shift elevator, alone. She wore oversized gray scrubs, her hair tucked into a loose bun under a plain cap, pushing a mop cart with steady rhythm. She didn't notice the stares, or maybe she'd learned to ignore them. Her face was bare of makeup, her body neither flaunted nor hidden. But there was something arresting in her simplicity, something unapologetically honest. She walked like she owed nothing, and that was precisely why he had to know her. At 34, Alexander had tasted every kind of thrill, but he'd never met someone who didn't seem to want anything from him. No fake smiles, no lipstick lies, just quiet, a quiet he suddenly craved. That night he stayed late on purpose. The building thinned out by 10. By 11, it was only night crew. Midnight was janitor time. She stepped in as scheduled, entering with her cart, her ID badge catching the dim hallway light. Alexander leaned against his office doorframe, arms crossed, watching. "Rough night?" he asked casually. She glanced up, surprised. Her eyes met his, deep brown, like earth after rain. She didn't smile. "I've had worse." Her voice was low, measured. "And you are?" He chuckled. No spark of recognition. That was rare. "Alex, I work here too." "Figured," she said, dipping her mop back into the bucket, unfazed. No double take, no blush, no... "Oh my God, are you Alexander Steele?" She was either unimpressed or uninterested. Both options irritated and intrigued him. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "Eva." He watched her mop. "You're not going to ask what I do?" "If it matters, I'll find out eventually," she said, keeping her eyes on the floor. He smiled. She was more than he expected. "Do you always speak in puzzles?" "Only when men ask questions like they already know the answers." That made him laugh genuinely. He took a step forward, and she paused, sensing him too close. "Relax," he murmured. "I'm just bored." "Then maybe go home," she replied. "This floor's clean." He should have walked away, but he didn't. Because for the first time in years, someone didn't care who he was, and that made him care more than he should have. She didn't know she was a dare. He didn't know she'd become his undoing. But the game had started, and by the time it ended, Alexander Steele, a man who never believed in surrender, would willingly lay his soul bare at her feet. For the next week, he didn't chase her. He simply showed up. She would arrive with her mop and gloves, expecting silence, only to find him seated near the window with a mug of coffee, reading something he wasn't actually reading. Sometimes he asked questions: what music she liked, what she thought of Seattle rain, whether she believed everyone was lonely, even in crowded rooms. Sometimes she ignored him. Other times, she answered with curt honesty that cut through him more than any flirt ever had. He learned that she was 23, that she was paying her mother's medical debt with 2 jobs, that she hadn't been to college because survival came first. He learned she read poetry she couldn't afford to buy, borrowed through the cleaning closet bookshelf. She loved Neruda and hated lies. She also told him, quite plainly, that she wasn't interested in men who wore suits like armor. "They always want to own something," she said once, not even looking at him. "A girl's body, a girl's story, a girl's silence." He wanted to say, "I'm not like them," but he didn't, because he was. At least he had been. Until now. Each night she left, he was the one who felt stripped, of arrogance, of certainty. He used to enjoy being pursued. Now he sat alone, realizing the one woman he wanted didn't want him back. Not for his charm, not for his power, and especially not for his money. She looked at him like she saw past all of it, like she was waiting to see if there was anything left worth undressing underneath. Blake, of course, kept asking, "Did you do it yet?" He snorted over a scotch one night. "Is little Eva still untouched?" Alexander didn't answer, not because he couldn't, but because suddenly the question felt stupid. She wasn't a virgin to conquer. She was a mirror, one he hadn't dared to look into until now, and it terrified him. The turning point came on a Friday night. A security glitch caused a brief lockdown on the top floor. The lights flickered, the elevators stalled. Alexander was in the office. So was she. "Looks like we're stuck," he said, as she stood near the hallway, gripping her mop like it might save her. "Generator will kick in soon." "I'm not afraid," she said, even though her voice shook. "I know," he replied softly, "but maybe I am." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw past the tailored shirt, the sculpted jaw, the wealth. His eyes were tired, not from work, from carrying too much of something unnamed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Talking to me? Watching me mop your floors like it's a performance?" He didn't blink. "Because I made a mistake," he said. "It started as a dare, a stupid, ego-driven thing. But then I saw you, and it wasn't about that anymore. I don't want to undress your body. I want to understand why you wear silence like a second skin." She stared at him, stunned into stillness. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "Most men try to touch me. You try to touch my pain." He stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough for honesty. "Because I recognize it, I carry my own." In the dim light of that glitching hallway, something shifted. She saw not a billionaire, but a boy who once needed permission to feel. He saw not a virgin janitor, but a woman who chose herself in a world that wanted to steal everything from her. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "You're undoing everything I believe about men." He smiled gently. "And you're undoing everything I believe about myself." He thought he'd strip her defenses. Instead, she peeled off his pride, layer by layer, until all that was left was truth. The lights came back on, the elevator chimed, but neither of them moved for a long while. After that night, things weren't the same. Alexander started arriving at the office earlier, Not to work, but just to catch a glimpse of her before she disappeared into some stairwell or utility closet. Sometimes she spoke first, sometimes she didn't. But she was different too, softer at the edges, as if she was letting go of something she'd held too tight for too long. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was the kind that made his breath catch. And God, she had no idea. She wore her hair tied up, practical, always with a pen behind one ear. Her uniform hung loose, oversized, probably borrowed. Her shoes were the kind you bought on clearance, worn through the soles, but none of it mattered. To him, she was thunder wrapped in quiet. A slow burn. He once caught her, standing on the rooftop alone after hours, watching the city from the edge of the world. He joined her without asking. "Do you ever wonder if this view is only beautiful because we're above it?" she murmured. "Because down there, it's chaos." He nodded. "That's why I come up here, to pretend I've figured it all out." "Have you?" she asked. "Not even close," he replied. That night, he walked her down the stairs not because he had to, but because he couldn't seem to stop orbiting her. Days passed, then a week. Blake called again. "You ghosting me now? Thought you'd have cracked that little virgin by now." The words made Alexander wince. "It's not like that," he said, flat. "Then what is it?" Blake laughed. "She got magic between her legs?" "No," Alexander said quietly. "She's got magic between her silences." Blake didn't get it. He wouldn't, but Alexander was already too far gone. He wasn't chasing lust anymore. He was chasing the feeling of being seen. Eva didn't flirt. She didn't touch. But when she looked at him, really looked, it was like she saw the boy inside the billionaire. The one who had once been told, "Men don't cry, men don't break, men win or they're weak." With her, he didn't have to win. He just had to be honest. Then came the night that changed everything. A burst pipe in the east wing flooded part of the building. Eva was there, trying to stop the leak before it damaged the executive floor. She was drenched by the time Alexander found her, her soaked uniform clinging to her like second skin, her breath short, hands trembling from the cold. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he said, stepping in beside her. "It's my job," she replied. "And besides, you don't get your hands dirty, right?" Instead of answering, he rolled up his sleeves and grabbed the wrench from her hand. "Tell that to my dry cleaner." She stared at him, surprised. He wasn't perfect at it. His grip slipped, water sprayed, but he didn't stop. And she watched him with something new in her eyes. Not pity, not awe, something softer. When they finally shut the valve, they stood in silence, soaked and breathing hard, water pooling around their shoes. "Why are you really here, Alexander?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He looked at her, and for once he didn't hide. "Because I used to think having everything meant needing nothing. Then I met you. And now I realize I'm starving." She said nothing at first, just looked at him, her hair hung in wet strands, her cheeks flushed, her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Then, quietly, slowly, she reached for his hand. It was small, calloused, and trembling, but it was hers. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He let her hold it, and when she did, it felt like she wasn't touching his skin. She was touching the parts of him no one had ever touched before. The damaged parts, the frightened parts, the parts still waiting to be chosen. "You think you were undressing me," she whispered, eyes locked on his, "but all this time, you were the one stripped bare." Alexander didn't know how long they stood there, wet and breathless, clinging to that fragile moment like it might break. But something shifted, not in the air, not in their bodies, but deep in the silence between their heartbeats. He followed her that night, not as a CEO, not as a man trying to win some bet, but as someone finally surrendering to the gravity of what he felt. They went back to the staff wing, through empty halls echoing with their footsteps, her hand never leaving his. Her room was small, barely big enough for the narrow bed and the stack of borrowed books by the window. She lit no candles, played no music, made no excuses for the peeling paint or cracked tiles. It was all real, raw, unadorned, just like her. She sat on the bed, pulled the towel from her hair, and stared at him, not with expectation, not with invitation, but with something braver, permission. "You can leave now," she said, voice steady. "Or you can stay. But if you stay because you see me." He stepped closer. "I do." She didn't look away. "No, Alexander. I mean the parts I've spent years trying to hide. The girl who still cries when she hears her father's favorite song. The girl who grew up being told she wasn't enough. The girl who didn't give herself away because she thought no one would stay afterward." He knelt in front of her, hands on her knees. "Then let me be the man who stays." Her breath caught, trembling on her lips, and when he leaned in not to kiss her, but just to rest his forehead against hers, it was the most intimate thing either of them had ever known. They didn't undress in a rush. There was no urgency, no conquest, just hands and eyes and time. She touched his chest not like a lover, but like an artist discovering texture for the first time. And when he finally slid her shirt over her shoulders, he did it the way someone would peel back a curtain to see sunrise. "You're beautiful," he said. She laughed, almost sad. "No, I'm not what you're used to." "Exactly," he whispered. "You're better." Their bodies met like puzzle pieces, not perfectly, but with that aching satisfaction of things finally falling into place. And afterward, in the hush between midnight and morning, she curled into him, her breath warm against his throat. He didn't speak, he just held her tighter, as if afraid she'd disappear. But she didn't. She stayed, and for the first time in years, so did he. He didn't check his phone, didn't think about shareholders or meetings or Blake's smug voice. All he thought about was how fragile she looked when she slept, and how invincible she made him feel just by trusting him. At dawn, she stirred. "You're still here," she murmured. He kissed the top of her head. "I told you I would be." "You don't even know everything about me," she said. "Maybe I'm not who you think I am." He smiled into her hair. "Good, because who I think you are scares the hell out of me, in the best way." She lifted her face, her eyes unreadable. "What happens now?" And Alexander, billionaire, breaker of hearts, who once treated emotions like a weakness, said the most dangerous thing of all. "Now, I stop pretending this was ever a game." The Monday morning after their night together, Alexander didn't show up at the penthouse boardroom. For the first time since founding Ashcroft Industries, he canceled a meeting with investors. Blake called twice. Alexander didn't answer. He stayed in the staff wing, sitting at the foot of her bed, watching her braid her hair in front of the mirror, with sleepy eyes and soft humming. "You're not going in today?" she asked without turning. "I already did the only thing that matters," he replied. She shook her head, half smiling. "That's not how CEOs stay rich." "That's not how souls stay empty either," he murmured. She turned to look at him then, as if seeing something brand new in his face. And maybe she was. Because the man who sat in her room barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, eyes warm with something close to reverence, wasn't the Alexander everyone else knew. He wasn't the wolf who played at loyalty only when it served him. He wasn't the man who saw women as currencies or distractions. He was hers, even if neither of them said it aloud. But the world wasn't made of rooms like hers. It was made of glass towers and whispered deals and people like Blake, who always smelled weakness before it showed. That afternoon, Alexander returned to the office, jaw tight, heart still tangled in her scent. Blake waited outside the elevator, arms crossed. "You missed your pitch call," he said flatly. "Didn't feel like selling today," Alexander answered, brushing past him. "And I told you, the janitor girl was off limits." Alexander stopped mid-step, slowly turned. "She's not a girl," he said. "She's a woman, one I'd trust with more than any name on your Forbes list." Blake narrowed his eyes. "You're falling for her. Off a bet. You know how pathetic that sounds." Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as glass. "You know what's more pathetic? Thinking love is weakness. I used to believe that too, until she undressed more than just my body. She undressed every part I've tried to hide, every lie I built this empire on, and I've never felt stronger." Blake scoffed and walked away, muttering something about loyalty and fortune. Alexander didn't follow. He just exhaled slowly, knowing exactly what needed to happen next. That night, he didn't return to the penthouse. He returned to her. She was barefoot in the kitchen, wearing one of his old shirts she must have found in the laundry. Her hair was down, eyes tired but gentle. "Back already?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. "I need to ask you something." She arched a brow, but said nothing. "Did it mean something to you too? What happened between us?" She looked at him for a long time. "I don't sleep with men to win games, Alexander. I don't undress to feel seen. I gave you something I hadn't given anyone, because you made me believe, just maybe, I wasn't invisible anymore." He stepped forward, took her face in both hands. "You've never been invisible. I just hadn't learned how to look." Then came a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of unsaid things, of two people standing on the edge of something they couldn't take back. "And if I told you," he whispered, "that I'm not just ready to lose the game, I want to burn the rule book?" Her breath hitched. "Then I'd ask what happens when the flames die out." "Then I'll stay," he said, "and build something new. With you." For the next few days, the world outside her small apartment seemed to blur. Alexander stayed, slept on the couch, though she quietly knew he was only pretending to be asleep. In the mornings, he made coffee without asking how she liked it, and somehow got it right. In the evenings, they cooked simple things together: pasta with too much garlic, grilled cheese that always burned at the edges, and once, pancakes for dinner. It felt absurdly domestic, dangerously intimate. But in that bubble of time, it also felt like freedom. One night, as she lay curled beside him on the couch, watching an old movie neither of them cared about, she whispered, "I still don't understand why me." He didn't look away from the screen as he said, "Because you didn't ask for anything, but gave me everything. Because you didn't try to impress me, you undid me. Because when I was the most powerful man in the room, you made me feel small. And I liked it." She turned her face into his chest, hiding the way her lips trembled. Not because she was afraid, but because her heart was expanding into places it had never dared to go before. Maybe this wasn't just a story about a challenge. Maybe this was a beginning. But reality always found a way back in. On a Thursday morning, her supervisor at the janitorial agency called. A whisper had reached their office. The Billionaire was entertaining staff. The agency didn't want a scandal. "You'll need to resign," the woman on the phone said briskly. "We don't do tabloid romance, and you clearly crossed a line." She hung up before the girl could say a word. That afternoon, Alexander returned from a meeting to find her sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the folded uniform she had worn the first night they met. Her hands were shaking. "They fired me," she said softly. He froze, then stepped toward her. "Because of me." She nodded. "They said I crossed a line." He dropped to one knee in front of her, cupping her hands in his. "No, I did. I pulled you into a world where rules don't apply. I should have protected you from the fallout." She looked at him then, eyes wet but fierce. "Don't you dare apologize for loving me, not if you mean it." His breath caught. "I do," he said, "more than I know how to say." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then say it without words. Say it by not running when this gets ugly." That night, Alexander made a choice, not out of guilt, not out of pity, but out of a deep, aching need to show her that she was more than a secret he kept behind closed doors. He made a call to his board, announced that he would be stepping away temporarily to focus on a new venture. "This isn't a retirement," he told them. "It's a return to something real." Blake tried to object, of course, warning him of the shareholders, the press, the empire at risk, but Alexander didn't flinch. "Empires built on hollow men eventually collapse," he said. "She's made me whole." The boardroom fell silent. The girl watched from the corner of the room, her heart thudding as he spoke her name aloud in front of them all. He didn't care who heard, didn't care what they thought. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't a man driven by conquest anymore. This was a man unburdened, and she was the reason. 2 weeks later, they walked into the charity gala together hand in hand. The cameras, the whispers, the barely concealed gasps from New York's most elite, it didn't matter. He had made his choice, and she was no longer a challenge, no longer a dare, no longer a secret. She wore a gown he had chosen not because it was expensive, but because when she looked in the mirror, she whispered, "I almost didn't recognize myself." And he replied, "That's funny. I've never seen you more clearly." The room parted around them like water as they passed, and yet she stood straighter than ever, chin up, fingers laced tightly with his. They paused in front of the press wall, and when a journalist dared to ask, "Mr. Grayson, is this your date or your employee?" Alexander didn't miss a beat. "This," he said, turning to her, "is the woman who taught me how to feel." And then he kissed her. Not for show, not to prove anything, just because he needed her lips more than the next breath. That night they danced beneath a sea of chandeliers. She was still shy, still unsure of how to glide in heels, but in his arms she moved like she belonged. When the music softened, he leaned in and whispered against her ear, "You undressed my soul the moment you looked at me like I was just a man, not a title, not a wallet, not a challenge." She pulled back just far enough to meet his eyes and said, "That's all I ever saw, a man who needed someone to see past the armor." They didn't stay long. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and led her outside, the city glittering behind them, but her hand was all he needed. In the back of the car, she rested her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart grounding her in a life she never expected. "What happens next?" she asked quietly. "We live," he said, "not as a billionaire and a janitor, just as two people who found something real in a world that tries to fake everything." Later that night, as they lay together, no titles, no power plays, no games. He brushed her hair from her face and murmured the words she didn't know she needed, until they broke her wide open. "You weren't part of the challenge, you were the reward." Her throat tightened. She cupped his jaw, traced her thumb along the scar near his cheekbone, and whispered back, "Then I'm keeping you, all of you, even the pieces that still ache." He closed his eyes, holding her like he was afraid to let go, and for the first time in his life, Alexander Grayson surrendered, not to power, not to pride, but to the girl who had been dared to undress and ended up exposing everything he never wanted to show anyone. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, casting long golden streaks across the room. She stirred beside him, tangled in the sheets, her lashes fluttering as if resisting the pull of the new day. Alexander watched her in silence, the quiet peace on her face a stark contrast to the war he had waged within himself for years. It was strange, he thought, how someone so gentle could dismantle the strongest defenses without even trying. She blinked awake, turned toward him, and smiled that sleepy, messy smile that had no pretense, no polish, just truth. "You're staring," she whispered, voice still husky with sleep. "Because I don't ever want to forget this," he murmured, brushing his fingers down her arm. "The way you look right now, the way I feel, it's the only thing that feels real anymore." She sat up slowly, pulling the sheets around herself, her voice quieter now. "This was supposed to be a game, a dare. You weren't supposed to feel anything." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Neither were you." Silence stretched for a beat before she asked, "And now?" He leaned in, resting his forehead to hers. "Now, I feel everything." She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. "Do you mean that?" "More than I've meant anything in my life," he said. "I was dared to undress a virgin. But you undressed every part of me I thought was untouchable. You saw the man, not the monster. And now I can't go back to who I was before you." She swallowed hard, her voice almost breaking. "Then don't." He exhaled sharply, like her words had knocked the air from his lungs. "Tell me what you want," he said, his tone low, almost desperate. "Anything, everything, it's yours." She paused, her fingers curling tighter around his. "I want a love that doesn't come with expiration dates or hidden conditions. I want to matter, not because I'm someone's fantasy, but because I'm real." His eyes never left hers. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that you do. Starting now." She smiled through the tears that blurred her vision, and then, half laughing, she whispered, "You're not great at challenges, are you?" He raised an eyebrow, mock offended. "Why do you say that?" "Because this time you lost the dare and gave me your heart instead." He grinned, pulling her against him again. "Correction," he murmured into her hair. "I didn't lose. I finally won something worth everything.